All right, just want to say another thank you to everybody. Hello, New York. I love this city, I have to say. New York City, incredible. And you guys, some of you guys may know I am from Philadelphia, and there's no way we could have pulled this off in Philadelphia. Sorry, Mom. Sorry, Dad. No, we love Philly. I know some of you guys are from Philly. We're actually from Westchester. I went to school in Bethlehem, which actually ties me to our keynote speaker, Geoffrey Cologne. He actually went to school at Lehigh University, so we have that in common. But Geoffrey Cologne has a book, and everybody here gets a copy of it. It's called Disruptive Marketing. Oh, can I hold this for a second? It's a yellow book, and it's actually published by HarperCollins, which is a big deal. And when I reached out to Geoffrey, I said, live streaming is disruptive. And in the beginning of the day, if you guys remember, I was like, you guys are going to learn a lot about live streaming, and you're going to learn some hacks, some tips, some tricks. It's going to be really powerful stuff. And the only thing, if you guys could do something for me, is do something good with it. I don't care if you want to make a ton of money. That's what I want to do, right? I know you do too, right? We've talked about it. Rudy, everybody here, we can use live streaming to make money, some businesses. But also, I think that it's really, really powerful stuff. And so be authentic, be you. Figure out what you want to do with it, and do something good, If you make a ton of money with live streaming, give a little bit to charity. If you put in a live streaming studio, do some, let a nonprofit use it on a Saturday, right? Help your local church on a Sunday. And I don't want to come up here and just say, hey, we all have to, do really good. But it's really disruptive, really powerful stuff, and I think what I'm trying to say here is that I believe that what we're going to get from Geoffrey's speech is going to be a direction in which we can head with live streaming, and it's going to be like a prevailing wind. And so when you have a keynote, you hope that it's going to kind of really summarize what we've learned. And we learned a lot of different stuff. And when I'm in my marketing thing, and, Rudy talked about this, other people talked about this on stage, we're making how-to videos, this, that, this is the trending thing, this is the hot thing, I'll make a video about this, I'll do a live stream about that, and maybe I'll get a lot of views, maybe it'll go viral, maybe this will happen. It feels like stuff's just coming at you. Whoa, esports, what is that? And you guys are focusing on that, and I think it's an amazing $150 billion industry. It's good to have focus. But today we got Facebook, we got LinkedIn, we got business opportunities. It feels like it's coming from every different direction. But if you can take away a prevailing wind, okay, if we can figure out which way the momentum is happening, I think that's what we're going to get from the keynote. I think we're going to try to figure out the way that we can set our sails. If you think about life as a sailboat, yeah, it's coming this way, it's coming that way, but the prevailing wind, that we can catch the sail, and I think that everybody is going to be stunned. We're going to have a networking event after this. We're going to have, beer and everything, and a nice happy hour. It's going to be a lot of fun. So don't forget to network with everybody, meet people, because I think that in 4 years from now, in 1 year from now, in 2 months from now, you're going to meet somebody, and they're going to make a big difference for your business. And I know a lot of people here are going to make a big difference for our business, so thank you. If, you shook my hand and said, hey, let's do this, let's do that, I sincerely do want to, turn this into a, something that works for everybody, and a win-win. That's what we're always looking for. So when Geoffrey gets up here, I'm going to give him the microphone in just a second. I think a lot of what you're going to learn is going to be in this book, so get a signed copy. There's enough for everybody over there. And I'm going to let Geoffrey come on.
Thanks, Paul. It's good to... It's good to be here. It's good to have the live audience here, the live audience streaming. Which is always quite fun. I think almost every event now in some capacity is somewhere on video. It's somewhere what we call in public. So the interesting thing is 20 years ago, at the corner of Broadway and Houston, there was a company called Pseudo.com. And Pseudo.com decided that they wanted to do live things on the internet, the World Wide Web. And this was quite interesting at the time because this is long before conversations about broadband, long before conversations around really any streaming type of technology. It actually took a lot to even get online back then. Of course, we all remember the sound that modems made. But Pseudo.com is interesting because it was almost like an art experiment. They decided, let's set up all these cameras in our loft studios and stream 24/7. And from that, the interesting thing is a film was made called We Live in Public. I don't know if anyone's ever seen this film. I encourage you to check it out. Paul, actually, if you could advance the slide for me. We Live in Public is fascinating because it actually sets where we are right now in the year 2019, 20 years after this art experiment, so to speak. For those who wonder what happened to Pseudo.com, like many things, it crashed and burned. The .com industry sort of swallowed it. The person who was in charge of it, Josh Harris, ended up, I think, in some motel somewhere in Las Vegas without any money. But the fascinating thing about it is it actually explains where we are right now. We aren't really live streaming as much as we live in public. And we can see more and more of this when we actually go out on the streets and decide to sort of film things in our neighborhood, when we go to events and decide to film them, when we figure out, hey, I'm in a nonprofit and I actually want to hold a telethon and we film them. Everything is public now. So we want to make sure that we understand more of this and where we were 20 years ago and where we're moving. So 67 years ago, there was an interesting event that took place here in New York City in Rockefeller Center. And instead of me explaining it, let's show this video. There's sound on here somewhere. What's sort of fascinating is, look at the lavalier mic that he has. Look at that lavalier mic. And we think things have changed that much. They've just sort of been remixed. The interesting thing here is this is the Today Show. This happened basically 67 years ago. It was the first live news broadcast. Now, what makes this interesting? It took lots and lots of people to make this happen. In fact, if we look at any live event, especially bigger events, sporting events, a lot of people, a lot of budget, a lot of equipment. If we actually fast forward now to the next slide and show the next video, this next video took place just in 2016 on the floor of the stock exchange with one camera, and it has led to basically a news network that sold for $200 million last year. This is Cheddar Television. No volume? No volume, all right. So as we can see, lower thirds, simple set, the background of the New York Stock Exchange, etc. everything sort of starts somewhere. So 67 years ago, lots of people basically to make something happen. It's 2016. The people on the back end, there were like 3 people basically running the production of this, 2 people with guests on the front end. This is all interesting because it's sort of fascinating to look at history. We have a tendency when we want to look at the future we only look at the here and now, and then we try to sort of guess where the next 5 or 10 years is going to be. That's actually the wrong way to look at research. Almost everything that we will see in the next 5 years in live streaming has already happened. It's already happened in history. It's going to be repackaged and remixed in new and innovative ways, and we're going to take a look at some of these. Let's go to the next slide, Paul, for another big event that happened in 1936. So this was probably one of the biggest events, and this is the 1936 Summer Olympics. It was the first event that was brought to a mass audience live. Of course, the picture of Jesse Owens here. What's fascinating about this is this was the first time also that television networks didn't worry about time zones. They basically said, everybody watches this whenever they want to. What's the biggest problem now when we watch the Olympics? Go ahead, shout it out. Wait, say it clear. You already know who won because it aired. Some other things. It's in the middle of the night. So the networks have almost taken control where they say, hey, we're going to show you what we think you're going to like. Rather than this spirit of live streaming, or live, I should say, where people say, hey, you know what? I want to actually see this when it's happening. If we go to the next slide, this show, gosh, this show lives forever, it seems like. American Idol in 2018 finally did the right thing. That is, they said, there is no East or West. We're all airing this at the same time because we want people to watch it at the same time together. We want people to vote at the same time together. We want the real zeitgeist of what's happening. So this is also fascinating because finally networks are maybe getting the clue that customers are in control. People are in control. They actually want to talk with one another on social networks when real things are happening online and happening in real time. Now, there's a couple of things that are interesting that are causing a lot of this sort of, intersections of a lot of different behavior. If we go to the next slide, what's fascinating is it took 38 years for 50 million people to listen to radio. It took 13 years for 50 million people to watch television. It took about 4 years for the internet to reach 50 million people. 3 years for the iPod to reach 50 million people. 2 years for Facebook to reach 50 million people. Today, if we put all this brain power in here and said, hey, we got some investment. Let's go start a live stream. We probably could reach 50 million people in a matter of 24 hours. In fact, when I was talking to Eddie from Amp Live before, he did that with an Al Gore live stream last year. This is the interesting power that a lot of media has not been able to figure out because they can't control it. And a lot of this ties into behavior. If we go to the next slide. Oh, the next slide. Sorry, Paul. Called the conjoint effect. So it's important to understand psychology and consumer behavior. When we have a tendency of having, and by the way, everyone was fascinating today. I was here the whole day. I learned a lot. So thank you for some of your advice. What was really interesting, though, is a lot of the ideas that we have are sort of similar to each other. And that's what is based on what we call the conjoint effect. It's the fact that brands, content creators, we're all converging at the same time. We're all stealing each other's ideas. In fact, this isn't really a new idea. Let's use the example of 20 years ago. How many people remember Green Day? All right. So at that time, there were also like dozens of other bands that sounded and looked like Green Day. Why? The conjoint effect. How come every radio show back in the 90s had this morning zoo feel to it? The conjoint effect. It's the same thing that's happening now in our world. We're all stealing each other's ideas. The important thing is, how do we actually differentiate? How do we become more unique? And we may think that's through technology, but a lot of that is actually through creativity and figuring out how you do not fit into a box. Next slide. So in terms of the conjoint effect, some of the research we've done, we now know people are acting more like brands. How many people are on social networks here? Probably a majority of us. How many people have followers? Yeah, we all have followers. So we're a lot like celebrities in that respect. That reminds me of Us Weekly. What's that section in Us Weekly? Celebrities also shop like us. We're all acting like celebrities in some respect. In fact, in our research, 50% of respondents agreed with the following quote: "Someone should make a movie about my life someday." Next slide. So some of the new centers of gravity. Proximity is an important one that we need to understand, especially when it comes to sharing culture. The interesting thing about live streaming, and I think it's come up quite a bit today, is the fact it's hard to fake it. When I've signed books for many of you here, I said, keep it real by keeping it live. You know, if you look at sort of the culture of hip hop, there was a lot of discussions on how you keep things real. No one really wanted other people to sell out. That doesn't have to do necessarily with money as much as it has with, are you being yourself in order to make a living? And I think what we've seen quite a bit on some other platforms is it's very easy to polish yourself using Adobe Photoshop on Instagram or editing all your videos on YouTube. Again, that's not going to go away. That's actually going to continue to get popular, I think. But the fascinating thing is that more and more, when we look at live streams, it's very hard to fake it. Because you are live, it's hard to edit things in a way where you can sort of tell a different tale. And that is what's become so interesting to a lot of people, especially when I sort of monitor my two daughters who are 9 and 11 respectively. They sort of enjoy watching live streams because they get a lot from the people who actually are on there. They like the way that they interact. They don't like the fact that many of them might have been, might be celebrities, etc. In fact, one of the things that's fascinating is we all know now, because we're smarter consumers, that a majority of celebrities are paid for their endorsements, and therefore we don't trust them as much. So this is interesting. Next slide, please. So from this sort of new center of gravity, we have what's called this new intimacy. So we have some new forms of proximity. They're rewiring what it means to be close. I've made friends with people online because of a shared passion, 73%, or I feel like I know my favorite celebrity personally, 48%. Again, how is live streaming playing into this so that people know how they can relate to you? And we'll dive a little bit deep into 5 different verticals in terms of the business. We also have what's known as the unfiltered me, which we've realized from some of our research. And that means that this culture of proximity is putting us in front of a bigger audience, and we're making new choices about when and how we reveal our true selves. Again, the issue with a lot of photography, if we look on the left, undoctored. If we look on the right, doctored. More and more, I almost keep asking people, we need media classes so that people can understand what's manipulated and what's not. Live streaming sort of drops that filtered shield that we have. But again, I think a lot of companies haven't understood that. If we look at the research, brands are as honest as people try to be. Only 32% agree with that. A lot of room for growth here. In fact, I think some of the biggest growth in our space will probably be brands who are trying to figure out how they get closer to people, that proximity, and deal with being unfiltered. Now, there's 5 areas that I want to dive deep that probably touch an area that all of us are in. The first is education. So this past week, Adobe announced something really interesting. I don't know if everybody has read about it, but if you log into Adobe Creative Cloud, you can watch a live stream of someone who makes that open and available to you that is working on a piece of software so you can learn how to use that software. That is fascinating. Why? Because I come from the school of design. The best way to learn design isn't by taking classes on design, it's being around other good designers. It's just like if you're an audio engineer. Yeah, the classes are good. It's better if you actually go into the studio and learn from a master. So more and more, this is interesting in terms of how this is going to change education, because a software company has actually said, hey, we're going to allow people to watch other people who make their work available on a live stream and then ask questions. Hey, how did you do that with the filtering? How did you make the color this way? How did you change the photography? The other thing that's interesting in terms of education is a couple of years ago, two Stanford University professors said, why are we teaching a class on physics to 35 people on campus? This is sort of absurd. There's a whole world out there. And so they opened up their class to anybody who wanted to pay $15, and they basically had like 1 million people that were watching their class around the world. That is probably scaring higher education that wants to keep the price inflated when a lot of this knowledge can actually be given to a lot more people who don't get into those schools. So this is going to be interesting in terms of where this is moving. The other area that's fascinating too is, I'm not anti-webinar, but the webinar is sort of a stale format for a lot of companies on how they educate people about their solutions and services. And I think live streaming in terms of the interactivity is an area we need to watch, because when we watch webinars now, there's a tendency of you watch PowerPoint slides like this, you hear a person's voice, and then at the end they ask if you want to type a question in. There's no human connectivity there. It'd be much interesting if we actually get to a point where people actually can speak to each other back and forth on a lot of these streams. In the area of nonprofits, there's a company called a nonprofit called Share Our Strength that deals with hunger with children specifically. Last year, they decided to hold a telethon. Why not? Let's raise not just money, but awareness for this. If we look at the majority of the people who are actually homeless in society who do go hungry, a large percentage of them are children. So this is another big area for nonprofits in terms of how they raise awareness, especially when we think about algorithms and how they work on most platforms. There's a tendency more and more for them to not be as organic in reach for a number of reasons. They want you to use their ad tools and systems to reach audiences. So therefore, in terms of live streaming, much of that has not been encumbered yet and actually spreads out to a larger ecosystem. Let's go to the next vertical. So entrepreneurs is an interesting one, because what's fascinating here is there's a number of case studies on companies that have decided, how do we build software, or how do we build a service, or how do we build a business? But actually, instead of us building it and then pushing it out to everybody, we get real-time feedback so we know if we're actually giving something that people want. This is a difficult thing for a lot of people to do, because you might actually be building something that the feedback might be, wow, that's terrible, I would never use that. But that's actually good feedback, and this is what a lot of entrepreneurs are now starting to do more of, where they're taking a lot of the feedback on their solutions to figure out what they should and shouldn't build. In fact, what's fascinating is larger companies are trying to sort of steal from entrepreneurs, that conjoint effect, on having weekly office hours so that people actually can say, hey, could you build this into your solution? Or did you ever think of offering this? So this is another fascinating area in terms of how we speed up innovation. And I think an area that live streaming will play a huge part. Now, I think the next slide is my only data slide that I have. Yeah, I work at Microsoft, and I'm only going to give you one slide with data on it. This is interesting because we haven't really talked a lot about artificial intelligence, and many of us might say, I don't need to learn anything about that. You know, we haven't even gotten really going in this area. But I want you to all think about, how does AI improve a lot of the services that we use to stream live? If you think about how we all probably streamed live when we first went on the web, maybe we had a phone and it was on a stand, and we had some sufficient lighting, and we made things happen. One of the things that's interesting in terms of artificial intelligence is, how does that improve things like your picture? Maybe it gives you information and it improves that for you. Or maybe it understands that you're streaming live on a platform. You have 30% of people who are watching from France, and it asks if you want to add French captions to your video. These are all areas that we do not have right now. In fact, Paul, are we even captioning these videos as they're live? All right, that's good. I like that accessibility factor. But this is a lot of stuff that many companies do not think about. And this is where AI could help improve that, especially when it comes to customer engagement. So we have to think about how this is built into more of our technology, not because it's an end-all, be-all solution, but it makes things easier to scale. Let's go to the next slide in the next vertical. This one we could probably spend all day on, but we don't have all day to actually talk about it. This probably is the most interesting area in terms of how things are shaping up. So one of the things we want to look at is, right now in Los Angeles, there is a company looking to launch to be the first 24/7 live streaming network. Now, you remember that NBC video. They want to basically buy a warehouse in downtown Los Angeles. They want to go on the air in the morning and have news. Then they want to have some variety shows. Then they want to have some soap operas. Then they want to have some comedies. Then they want to maybe have a late night show. What does that sound like? Sounds like broadcast television. These are the things that we have to actually think about and watch for, because it's going to be fascinating if they actually get this off the ground and it becomes a real network. And it will actually cause more chaos, because we won't be able to figure out what's streaming and what's live streaming. You'll have people, hey, have you heard about this new streaming network? Oh, you mean like Disney Plus? No, I mean like the live network, the one that's 24/7. So this is interesting in terms of where things could be going with media on that end. The other area is news. News has been so poorly reported because there's only so much time to curate the news. If you think about it, you have half an hour for local news. So there are many, many services now trying to figure out, how do we actually create news that's basically people-driven, that's more neighborhood, that again reminds me of the local newspaper, which mainly has been sort of destroyed because of other platforms. So this cyclical pattern is really important for us to pay attention to. The fifth area is sports, and we know we talked a lot about esports, but I think the fascinating things we want to watch now is, what are the sports in the niche, or that are on the edge, or that are on the margins, that have used live streaming to gain an audience? How many people are familiar with the National Women's Soccer League? All right. So still building. One of the things that's fascinating about them is they had a deal with Lifetime. Lifetime aired the games. Not many people watched. And then they basically lost their sponsorship. And they tried to figure out, where do we go? And so they streamed most of their games from their YouTube channel in the interim. And then the World Cup happened, and then ESPN came and said, we got to do a deal. But it kept it alive, at least for the audience that was interested. Lacrosse is trying to do this now. Again, sort of a fledgling sport. There's also other things that are quite interesting in terms of UFC and why that is so big. It's not big because two people want to beat the shit out of each other. It's actually big because they've used live streaming to connect with their athletes. At some of their bigger events, before you actually watch the pay-per-view, you can watch the athletes getting ready. And you actually feel that emotion. And then they've tried to also connect with a lot of the athletes to show how human they are. Because yes, while these men and women can pound each other, they are real people at the end of the day, and that's been sort of fascinating to watch. I think the fascinating thing with sports is also the Antonio Brown incident from a couple of years ago. There now has to be rules. And you know you're actually going somewhere as an industry when there are rules on what you can live stream and what you cannot as a player. As an NFL player, you are actually prohibited from live streaming video the second you enter into your locker room. And that all stems from Antonio Brown a couple of years ago, live streaming from the Steelers locker room, a bunch of things where you could hear people in the background talking about plays. So these are things that we have to think about in terms of who's going to actually limit this and who's actually going to use it to their advantage to grow their sport. And I think it's fascinating in terms of the fact that, yes, while ESPN loves to show major sports, there is a lot of room, and I think a lot of people brought it up today, for what happens behind the scenes with these athletes, especially when it comes to the Olympics. Most of those athletes don't get paid a lot, but they train their asses off. They're almost like machines. They eat the same thing every day. They have training. They go to sleep. And that's actually fascinating to watch if you can actually get in on the inside of what it's like for a few hours in their day. So most people will have a tendency of talking a lot about the technology that's required to get online. And while that's really important, and I want us to pay attention to that, and I'm a geek about those things, and I think we all should, at the end of the day, the most important thing if you want to endure in this space is how do you have something that's creative and interesting? How can you create habits with people where they want to watch your programming at least 66 times? And the reason I say that is neuroscience has proven you need to actually do something 66 times in order for it to become a habit. So this is very important for anyone here who does 3 live streams and then goes, screw this, I don't have 1 million followers, never going to happen for me. That's very similar to a lot of people who wrote 3 blogs thinking they would find a huge audience. So I think one of the most underrated metrics is time. And many times as humans, we're just not patient for that. So a lot of people might say we're living in this sort of era of live streaming, but if we think about it and return to what pseudo.com had done 20 years ago, almost everything can be shown now and be fascinated about to some audience. In other words, we're really living in an era of being public again. And there's a lot of things that are going to come with that, a lot of ethical conversations, a lot of discussions around, hey, is this something that should be live streamed? And of course, I would hope all of us in the room are leaders in this space to question that, think about those things, and how we can sort of bring this to the next stage. I'm Geoffrey Cologne. I'm head of brand studio at Microsoft Advertising. If you haven't gotten a book, I'm happy to sign it, and I'll stick around for any of your questions. Thanks again, everyone. Yeah, so if you have any questions, I'll turn it over to Paul. I'll sign some books in the interim.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Anybody?
Who am I asking, you or Geoffrey? Do I get to Geoffrey? Hi, right here.
Oh, hey, sorry about that.
So here's a question for you. So there are these organizations that obviously have resources and they're well funded, like the one you were speaking about in LA. That's going to be a 24/7 live network. I would imagine they're going to need a lot of content, and they're not going to be able to create all of it. Do you think that content creators like us will have an opportunity to create and sell that content to those organizations?
What's your name?
Cliff.
Cliff.
Yes.
That is an excellent question. The answer is yes. If we think about this, I actually think they're stealing a lot from the Sirius XM model. If we think back to satellite radio, when satellite radio first launched, there were two different networks. You had Sirius and then you had XM before they merged. They had centralized locations where they were like, all of our talent is on location doing the voiceovers that we then put in between songs. If we fast forward, most of those people are now throughout the world creating that content for Sirius XM that they license. So I do think that, yes, what they probably will do over time is figure out, hey, who can we license content from, because it is going to be too expensive to do it all in a studio. And second, they don't want to limit themselves by geography, because then you're limiting creativity. If you're like, well, we need these people in LA, that was the problem in the old model. Not everyone could be there, per se. Some people are very creative in their bedroom no matter where they are. That's the wonderful thing about sort of the web and what it's created. So I do think more of that will happen. I also think what's interesting about this, if they can get it off the ground, is it allows for many of us who've been in this space to say, hey, we've been experimenting for a long time here, and finally there's something that acts as the tipping point to show that this is a viable model. Because I don't know about you, Cliff, I still get a lot of people who say, that's a waste of time, we would never do that, it's too expensive. They don't even understand it's not that expensive, especially from a small business side. And you're doing it for the authenticity and also around some special events. Like when we live stream as Microsoft at Consumer Electronics Showcase, you have to go live. You have to get the emotion that's going on there. You want to talk to people who are actually on the floor. That wouldn't make sense if we recorded it and then broadcast it later. There are certain things in life that I think are pretty cool to be live still.
Not only that, but you could also record a live and deliver it as a premiere to YouTube or Facebook, where the comments are live.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're going to see a lot more of. So, great question, though. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes. Other questions? I love that mic, that microphone. That's cool. Any others? All right, well, I'm here. You can come chat with me. Thanks again, everyone. Thanks again, StreamGeeks.
Test. Thank you, everybody. Happy hour is just about to start, so if you want to stay around and network with everybody, there's beer and wine at the back, and we'd love to chat with you guys. All right, thanks.